Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to the Freedom Truth Radio Show. This is your host, the one and only Vincent E. Scott, and we are live tonight. It is July 28th, 2019, and we're back on the radio show. We have been gone for quite some time. Been gone for about a month and a half, because we had some things to take care of at home and some family things to deal with. But we are back and live in the studio again. Just happy to be here with a very, very, very special guest, a friend of mine, better known to everyone else as Dr. Ebony White. Hello, Dr. Ebony.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. It's good to see you. And Dr. Ebony is a mental health specialist, and we're going to get right into the subject matter at hand. And we're going to talk about people dealing with mental health and how we address it in our community. And not only that, just overall the definition of what mental health is and how we can better address the things that go along with mental health, because I think we have ignored things for a long time. And there are, plenty of things. We sitting here having a 5-minute conversation just before we started, and you got to be careful with doctors because they start evaluating you right while you talk. And she said, "Yeah, there's a name for what you're going through." I'm like, "Okay, really? Getting diagnosed already?" Okay, but that's a good thing because she's very much an expert in her field, and she works in the field of education as well as with children, and she has a foundation that she'll talk to you about later on that, I think you all should look into and really subscribe to some of the things that she's talking about because it can really help. So, Dr. Ebony, first of all, introduce yourself to the Freedom Truth Radio family, and so they can know who you are.
You did a pretty good introduction. So, Dr.
I
Ebony
tried.
White. I have a nonprofit in the city of Trenton where I was born and raised that primarily focuses on mental health in the community, but we also, as you stated earlier, have a primary focus on adolescents with tutoring and mentoring as well. But right now we're really focused on mental health counseling. Also, I am an assistant professor at Drexel University in the counseling and family therapy program. So I teach undergraduate students in our counseling programs who most of them go on to pursue their master's degrees to also become licensed mental health professionals in the field. I do a lot of service work and advocacy. Right now, our nonprofit, we're in the midst of doing these free community mental health workshops. The most recent one took place on yesterday at Greater Sea Ministries, and that particular workshop focused on mental health and the church because of
That's a whole nother show.
Right, absolutely, a lot of misunderstandings, discrepancies, or even just questions that people had. So that turned out really, really well. And our last workshop is going to be August 10th at 802 East State Street in Trenton, New Jersey, and they're from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I like that. And you all need to pencil that date in and go check that workshop out. 'Cause that's something good that you need to look into, because I think that's a subject that goes ignored, highly ignored, especially in the church, because, that's something, anytime you deal with a factor talking about mental health, people say, "Oh, well, we just pray about it." No, we have problems that need to be dealt with by professionals that exceed just having a simple circle prayer. And I'm not saying prayer don't work. I'm a firm believer. However, there's some things you just cannot pray away. We have to actually deal with it. And this is why people go to school to study professions such as mental health, to deal with problems on a professional level, where we can talk about, the elements of what causes these types of problems, and why, this person is going through this particular amount of trauma, because that's basically what starts it all. Am I correct? is some type of trauma.
So it's not always a type of trauma, but trauma is a big conversation
Okay.
as well. But a lot of times there is trauma that has occurred, but sometimes trauma hasn't occurred that's led to folks' issues.
Okay. Now, we're talking about mental health.
Hmm.
When you say mental health right away, there's there seems to be some type of stigma attached to that, where people say mental health. What you mean mental health? I'm fine. Like it's they automatically attribute the subject of mental health by saying like either crazy or Looney Tunes or cuckoo or ain't wrapped too tight. We got them all
Off,
off. Yeah, ain't the
touched.
brightest crayon in the box. Ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
Hmm.
We got a whole
Hmm.
list of things that we can attribute the subject of mental health or attribute the characteristics of that. But mental health is not always dealing with something that affirms craziness.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because
Hmm.
that's how I begin all of my workshops. I say, just yell out, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say mental health? And
Right.
I get everything that you just said. People say cray cray,
Yeah.
cuckoo,
Right.
all of those things. And I'm always
My little
interested to
kids say
hear
dur
them.
dur dur.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And so I'm always interested in that feedback
Right.
because it's funny to me how when I say mental health, automatically people think mental illness. They don't talk about
Mm,
mental health. Whereas if
got
I
it.
were to say, if I went to someone and say, how's your physical health? They'd be like, oh, it's good, and then they actually give you how their physical health
Right.
is. As soon as you say the words mental health, health doesn't come to mind for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Illness does. Um, and we do a poor job. I mean, there's a historical context to that, but we do a
Understand.
poor job of really making conversations about mental health okay and making them normalized.
Okay. Now, why is that? Because would you say that because there hasn't been a safe environment for people to discuss
Hmm.
that?
Absolutely. I work primarily with folks of color, and I'll say specifically black folks. And there is a
Understand.
history in our country and our societies where if people saw you as deficient or wrong, you'd be cast aside, you'd be
Mm-hmm.
labeled, you'd be locked up, whether that's put into a prison or a mental institution, the
Right.
family would be disrupted, right? And so, out of those experiences, the term that's common in the phrase that's common in black households that what happens in the house stays in the
Stays in the
house was
house.
birthed because they
Yes.
recognized that seeking services or when outside services came in, it automatically meant a disruption
Mm-hmm.
in the family, a labeling, right?
Yes.
A categorization that could be really harmful and sometimes fatal
Right.
for families. And so we learned really quickly, as we do as a people, we adapt to our environments and try to take care of things in the
Okay.
home. However, as you know, there are many things that are just outside uh, of what our abilities are.
Well, I agree with that completely. It's just that um, areas where you think there is a safe environment, such as church or such as home or a relative's house. Like,
Hmm.
for instance, I know some family members that won't talk to their mother, but
Hmm.
they'll go talk to an aunt
Hmm.
that is, they feel is close enough that they can relate to.
Hmm.
But that's not enough.
Hmm.
And, people won't take this public or go to see a professional because they don't want to be labeled as, because if I'm going to see a professional, I must be over the edge.
Hmm.
So why do you think they stay away from the professional?
Hmm.
Because you've gone to school, you've gotten a doctorate, you've gotten your license
Hmm.
in studying this kind of subject matter.
Hmm.
So why do people stay away?
So, first and foremost, what you said is still, unfortunately, remains true for many folks, not for a lot of folks. Because
Okay.
as I was telling the gentleman when I first came here,
Mm-hmm.
I have a waiting list of people trying to get in
That's great.
to see me. So it's not
Okay.
that people aren't recognizing that there's something going on.
Right.
So, but there is still stigma in our community. But then I think even more importantly, there's not a lot of black mental health professionals.
No, there are not.
And so, you know, there's this cultural mistrust that is very valid,
Yeah.
where many people, they're not going to trust someone who doesn't look like them with their personal issues, right? What if I say something and they call the people on me, or what if I,
Yeah.
what if they're judging me when I say this? And so, unfortunately, there's not a lot of or enough black professionals that people have access to.
Yeah.
And when
That's
they
true.
do have access to them, they're not in private practice, they're in organizations
Mm,
and agencies that aren't run by people who look like them. And so they still have to deal with a system
got it.
that they are uncomfortable with. The other thing is, our families are dealing with a lot of levels
Hmm.
of issues. And so if I'm a single parent, whether that's a father or a mother, right?
Yeah.
And I want to come to counseling, I have to think about childcare, right? If
Mm,
I don't have transportation, I have to think about that. Or if I'm coming to the service and you're only open from 9 to 5, well, I work too, so how am I going? So there's a lot of barriers
okay.
as well that people have to overcome
Hmm.
in order to get services. And then there's payment.
There is, because insurance doesn't cover that.
So most insurances cover counseling. I can't think
Okay.
of an insurance that doesn't, but some professionals can't take certain
I got you.
insurances,
I
right?
understand.
So they would
Okay.
have to pay out of pocket, and it gets really expensive.
I'm sure.
Hmm.
Well, because you can't settle all your problems in one session.
Exactly.
You have to go for recurring sessions.
Hmm.
Okay. So, all right. So a scenario. Uh, I have, um, let's just say I have a person that is, that suffers from some type of depression. Just
Hmm.
make it general because depression is very common
Hmm.
in just about any community, and they don't they don't necessarily talk about it, or they don't display the behavior of a person that has symptoms of depression because it's kind of kept quiet.
Hmm.
And they're able to go through their normal day. They can work, they can either go to school, whatever, if they're a student, whatever, and they can you know go about their daily routine. But then it gets to the breaking point where they have that panic attack or that nervous breakdown,
Hmm.
and nobody knows, and then all of a sudden they get the diagnosis saying they have severe depression,
Hmm.
and everybody's surprised.
Hmm.
How do you deal with, or how does a person deal with being looked at differently by their family members, peers, colleagues,
Hmm.
people that they deal with every day? All of a sudden they're like, this is normal Joe Schmo,
Hmm.
and I didn't know he was going through all that.
Right. So I want to back up a little bit. Um, if someone has depression,
Hmm.
there's going to be signs that they have depression. So sure, there are certain tasks you'll
Hmm.
be able to complete, but there are certainly always going to be signs that someone has depression. It's just important to know that for certain people, like for instance, black people, particularly black men, exhibit different symptoms of depression
Hmm.
than the rest of the population, right? So a lot of
Yes.
times for black men, anger is a symptom of
Yes.
depression, right?
Yes.
And so there's always going to be signs. But to answer your question, how do you deal with that? I mean, of course, the quick answer is to have a support system and then go to counseling in order to navigate that. But it's not just that person's responsibility to have to deal with that situation. We all have to be educated, and the people that's around that person has to put things in place so that they know they're not alone, right? And
Hmm.
so mental health is not just an individual's problem, it's a family's problem, it's a community's problem. And so we all need to kind of rally around this person.
Hmm.
And they have to understand, like, just like if they got hit by a car and had a limp, people are going to notice it.
Okay.
People are going to have a response, but it's up to them about how much they want to share. And then they need to have supports accessible and available to them to get through that.
Okay, so let's flip that.
Hmm.
They have the support system,
Hmm.
the family, their surroundings, their colleagues, whatever.
Hmm.
Notice that there is a problem.
Hmm.
Person's in denial. I
Hmm.
don't need help. I'm not going to talk to nobody.
Hmm.
I don't need anybody to think I'm crazy.
Hmm.
And besides that, I don't trust people.
Hmm.
I'm not talking. How do we deal with that? How do we, as a community,
Hmm.
like, because there are situations like that, how do we deal with trying to better the whole of our community if we can't get help to those that need help, if we're trying to be supportive.
Right. So you can't make anyone do something
You,
that they don't want to
right.
do.
I get that.
But there's also a way that we can talk about mental health that doesn't seem accusatory, right?
How? Deal
And
with that. That's
responses,
good.
right? And
That's good
responses that
segue.
aren't
Yes.
accusatory. And so if someone is saying to you, "No, I'm not crazy," you can say,
Not accusing you of that.
"Exactly, I'm not. You know, I don't
Right.
think you're crazy at all, right?
But that's
I've noticed some changes and thought this would be helpful."
that's immediately the defense mechanism that's put out, that when people even come across not in an accusatory fashion, that they say, well, I'm not crazy.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with me. Why are you saying that I need to go get some help? Or why are you suggesting that I need to seek counseling?
Right. And so I tell people to seek counseling not because they're crazy, but so they won't become crazy, right? Because so when they reach the point where what comes to mind for people, they're not going to benefit just from counseling. They're going to have to likely be hospitalized if they had a breakdown or a
Right.
psychotic break, right?
Yes.
Be medicated, right, until they get to a point where they're stabilized and are ready to step down and come home, and then they get counseling. Counseling is to prevent. It's a preventative method. So when you notice that things are going right, or you notice changes in your behavior, your moods, your
Yeah.
relationships, when you notice those changes, that's when you seek counseling. Counseling, we're not, we don't recommend counseling because we think, something's wrong with you, right? We recommend
Right.
it so that you don't get to a point where you need something more.
Got it. Now, I know one of the biggest factors that can be a target towards not having good mental health is stress, and it's something everyone deals with. Whether it be raising children, whether it be paying bills, whether it be working too many jobs. How can we learn to balance stress and better our mental health? What are some things that we can do, just in a general sense, that helps us give our life, or gives our lives a better sense of balance, so that we can deal with stress on a more healthy fashion
Right.
to maintain mental health?
So coming from this is a word I use all the time, and I've been told that I need to
Redefine.
use layman's terms, but I was gonna say coming from a collectivistic culture. So Black people were very communal. We need each other, and so there's this new word term that has come out called self-care, that has caused quite a reaction in communities of color because self-care sounds selfish. We don't do things typically just for ourselves, particularly women of color, right? Everything
No.
we do, what makes us feel good, is
You're right.
the
Everybody
it's for
else.
everybody else, right? I see a lot of women, and I'm not trying to just domesticate women, but I'm thinking about my grandma, who the thing that made her help her cope with stress is cooking a meal for her family,
I agree.
right? And
Yes.
so it was something that involved others, and so
Yeah.
one of the things is we have to figure out what soothes us, what makes us happy, and it may not be something that you do individually.
Okay.
But one of my favorite strategies to employ when I'm working with clients is a body scan, because people don't realize that whatever we go through in life, whatever traumatic experiences, even if we don't register them as traumatic, our bodies store them. And that's why another symptom of depression that people don't realize is physical pain.
Okay.
People often go to the doctor and they're like, my back hurt, my arms hurt, my legs hurt, and the doctors run these tests and they can't find anything wrong. And then the doctor finally say, have you seen a therapist? Because that's a sign of depression as well.
Okay.
So our bodies store, particularly trauma, all of this trauma, and if we have no release for it, I strongly believe, I know this to be actually truth, what you don't talk out, you act out. And so it's important to do that body scan, because sometimes it's difficult. We don't have the language to express what we're going through, but our bodies kind of can tell us. So it helps
Wow.
it helps you to reconnect with yourself. So I may not. There's been days, and I'll talk about myself, where I start crying for no reason. Like, what's
Okay.
this about, right?
Okay.
Or I might be irritable one
Yes.
day, right? Or people are like, well, why am I so irritable or touchy, today? What's
Yeah.
going on with me? But if you have reconnected with your body and you know that you hold stress in your shoulders, or that when you're angry you get a headache, or that when you're sad you get a lump in your throat,
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't have the language, if you know, okay, I'm feeling this, what am I sad about? I can get in touch
Mm-hmm.
with that. Oh, you know what? Yesterday was the anniversary of my cousin's death. So you're
Understand.
you're able to have that mind, body, emotion
Mm-hmm.
connection if you participate. And so that's a strategy to be able to recognize when there's stress in your bodies, but also something that we should all do. Like I said, it's a form of self care, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it by yourself. So if it's
Okay.
just getting together with your friends,
Mm-hmm.
if it's doing something with your children, or whatever it is that soothes you, make sure you engage in it
Mm-hmm.
as often as possible.
Wow. It's very interesting you bring all those things up because I noticed like my father passed last year, and when it came time to go to the hospital and check his body, and then after that make funeral arrangements, whatever, I grief didn't hit me right away. Like I went to the hospital, I saw him laying there in the bed. I felt absolutely nothing, and I had to ask my best friend. I said, "Is something wrong with me?" He was like, "No." He said, "You have your time," and I really didn't understand that because he
Hmm.
had already been through a loss. So when I encountered that, I was like, okay, I need to really find out where I'm at because I'm thinking something's wrong. 'Cause this is
Hmm.
my dad. I'm like, I'm not grieving. I'm going about business as usual. Like,
Hmm.
I'm thinking about is what move I got to make next.
Hmm.
Got to make funeral arrangements. Got to make sure his obituary is typed out. I got to make sure I get the preacher. I got to make sure I get flowers. Get the repast, food, whatever.
Hmm.
Doing everything. And everybody in the family was like, "Do you need help?" I'm like, "No, I got it. I'm good."
Hmm.
And I went about this for probably almost a year. And one day I was at work, probably about maybe 10, 11 months in,
Hmm.
and I lost it.
Hmm.
And it just hit me all of a sudden. I'm like, I had to go in the bathroom, just like, I'm like, I'll be back. And I'm like, okay, this is what I needed back then, but I guess it didn't
Hmm.
register. Like, my dad ain't here no more.
Hmm.
Like, all of a sudden, it's like just all coming down. And I wasn't even thinking about it, just
Hmm.
like that.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, now now that I got that out, it's like, okay, now I'm able to sit back and think about him without going nuts.
Hmm.
And like I can sit back and think, have some thoughts about him, my childhood, and be like, okay, I miss dad, but I'm good right now,
Hmm.
and I'm doing, I'm trying to do as much as I can that I know would make him proud if he were still here, keep his legacy going. Death is something that I think people uh, don't get a healthy time to grieve in order to maintain their mental health because it can really it can really play a really huge part on people losing it, especially if it's somebody close.
Hmm.
If they are not taught how to grieve or how to deal with grief, I don't think there's any right way. Because, we've been told so much in this society, just keep it together, just, hold, keep calm,
Hmm.
just, but sometimes losing it is good. And we don't talk enough
Hmm.
about that. Can you talk about the benefits of going crazy?
So first of all, my condolences. I wasn't
Thank you.
aware of that.
Hmm.
But then, I almost feel like you were a fly on the wall in a session on yesterday, because we had a really long conversation
Really?
on loss and grief,
Okay.
right? And I say it in that way because I never understood how people say grief and loss when the loss
It's first.
is first,
That's good. That's
and then
good.
it's grief. We had a really a conversation, and there was a particular story that's coming to mind
Hmm.
where 20 years after the person lost their father, they were sitting at home and all the songs reminded them of their
Wow.
father, and they started screaming.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So I mean, and there were other similar stories, and so is there any right way to grieve? No. People
Okay.
handle grief very differently. Are there 5 stages of grief? Yes.
What are those 5 stages?
The 5 stages of grief. So, and it's not in any particular order, right?
Okay.
Because whatever happens first for you, or when it happens, and you can cycle
Right.
back and forth
Okay.
as well. But you have anger, denial, bargaining, sadness, and then acceptance.
Hmm.
But you can bounce around from those
What's
things over and
bargaining?
so it's like so I'll give you an example. My cousin, when I got the word my cousin died, I ran up to my room. I was young. I ran
Hmm.
up to my mom's room. I lay on the bed and I said, God, if you not let this be true, I promise I'll do this, I'll do that, right?
Hmm.
And another example is loss is not just the loss of a person, like a person who dies.
Yeah.
It could be the loss of a relationship. And so even when the relationship's over, people say, let me try this. If I just do this, if I just work harder, or loss of a job. No, I promise I'll get it right. Right. So people go through this bargaining
Yeah. Yeah.
stage
I understand.
of grief. But yeah, and it can happen right away. It can happen over and over again,
Hmm.
right? Because you never get over a loss. You just
No,
keep going.
that's right.
And so you always hold that space, and it may feel lighter. You may not cry as much. You may not be as angry, right?
Hmm.
But you go through those things. And I was saying it yesterday, I said, I'm always worried. The longer it takes someone to register that they've experienced a loss, the more concerned I am. So when you said you were 10,
Mm.
11 months in,
Yeah.
that could have been very traumatic
Okay.
for you, because what happened is all, you did a whole lot of busying yourself right away,
Yeah,
so
I
that you
did.
didn't give yourself time to be like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I lost my dad.
Right.
You automatically went into, okay, there's work to be done.
Hmm.
And so our bodies are very smart, just and our minds are very smart. Right? If I cut my arm right now, all the blood will come to it, clot, make sure I
Yes.
stop
Hmm.
bleeding. My mind knows how much pain I can handle at any given moment.
Got it.
And that's why if I'm in a car accident, most people tell you that they remember everything but the car accident, because your
Mm.
mind shuts off,
Shuts
because it
off.
knows, nope, you're not
Yes.
going to be able to handle
That makes sense.
all of that. And so, I imagine that when you saw your dad and you started thinking about everything you had to do, your mind said you can't do both.
Mm. Wow.
You can't
Wow.
hold, okay, you need to get this work done, so we need to shut this part down
Hmm.
for a second so that those things can be
Yeah.
complete. And then
Yeah.
it caught you off guard, because when you weren't actively shutting that space down,
It just came.
it
Yeah.
came
It really did.
it came to you.
Yeah. That's something. Uh, you know, it's really it's really ironic for myself, because normally I'm a delayed reaction type person. Even in situations dealing with stress or something like, or loss, not just death, but uh, I'm always thinking like, all right, yeah, this is what it is. I've come to accept it. All right, what's next? Like, I'm not gonna sit here and dwell on the emotional factor, if you will. But then I get angry, and it hits me, and especially if it's something that's done to me, then I'm thinking about ways to retaliate. I want revenge, like, and that's not always good either.
Probably never good. But okay,
Well, I'm
we'll stick
saying
with
this
what you said.
because,
It's not always good.
yeah,
Okay.
well, I'm saying this because I know I'm probably one of millions of people that feel the same way, and it's okay. Say for instance, you know, if a person's in a relationship and something happens, and at the time when you find out whatever the situation is, you don't want to talk right now, you
Yes.
know. And some people can do that. I can't. Like, we'll talk later, you know. Uh, and even in the subject of sometimes raising children, children will, present things to you that you like. I tell you that this is not how it's supposed to be, and you're like, okay, well, you get tired of repeating the same thing over and over.
Mhm.
But at the, there comes a point where you don't want to talk. And like, okay, I've said enough. Like, in parenting, how do you deal with it? I probably need a session for this.
Oh, just for that?
Yeah, just for parenting, because let me tell you, parenting is something that you need a coaching
Mhm.
for how to maintain mental health, because
Mhm.
parenting is probably one of the toughest challenges ever in life, because you're managing another you.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, there's this whole thing that Oprah has on her show. I forget the name of the doctor and the person that wrote this book. It's called The Conscious Parent,
Hmm.
which I think is a bunch of malarkey. But
Mhm.
they have this thing. Oh no, you have to, be a conscious parent where you learn how to reason with the child, and you just you sit the child down and you say, well, what is it that you want? And see, that's foreign to folk in the
Mhm.
black community, because like, sit him down, ask him what he want. What you mean, ask
Mhm.
him what he want? I'm the one fixing his food, providing his clothes, But I don't think parenting has been, or the stress factors dealing in parenting has been taught,
Mhm.
like how to deal with it, how to maintain your mental health
Mhm.
in being a parent. Like, what would you suggest to parents, working class parents, that
Mhm.
have to manage running a household, taking care of children, paying bills,
Mhm.
and keeping a relationship or a marriage, whatever have you?
Mhm.
And if they're in any sector of religion, keeping their faith
Mhm.
up high.
Mhm.
How do you balance all or juggle all these balls?
Right. Something that as adults we understand societal rules, right?
Hmm.
So I know that the behavior that I exhibit at my friend's birthday party can't be the same behavior I exhibit at a library or in church,
Got
or
it.
the way that I talk to my best friend can't be the same way that I talk to my grandmother, right?
Hmm.
So as adults, we know that there are different situations call for different sets of roles.
Yes.
Um, and so I would say the same thing applies when you're an adult who's a parent, right?
Hmm.
I think I work mostly with adolescents, with teens. And
Hmm.
one of the biggest, I don't want to call it errors because parents are doing the best that they can, but one of the biggest issues, I notice that parents don't realize that their children are children.
Hmm.
And so there's this expectation that they have of their children to think like adults
Hmm.
when they haven't finished developing and they don't have the life experience or the know how.
That's funny, because I heard something about this in psychology,
Mm-hmm.
about this whole
The
frontal lobe,
prefrontal cortex.
prefrontal cortex that has
Mm-hmm.
not fully developed.
Exactly.
So it has a lot to do with their
Reasoning.
judgment
Right.
and their reasoning,
Uh huh.
and how they respond to certain
Absolutely.
stigmas and no, stimulations. I'm
Yes.
sorry, mental stimulations. Like, how does that, like? I'm trying to formulate my question. Like, some things you think as a parent, I guess you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking should be common sense to an adolescent, but it
Mm-hmm.
really isn't.
But was it common sense to you as an adolescent? Right. And so
It
people for
wasn't,
right.
but I don't remember that far back.
Right.
Like, I guess when you become an adult, sometimes you think you've been thinking this way all along,
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't.
Right.
And sometimes we do need a flashback.
Mm-hmm.
We get it in our kids, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, I couldn't have been like that when I was a child. You
And,
immediately
and
go
your
into a
parent
state
might
of
say you were
denial.
worse.
Or worse, like,
Right.
you go into the state of denial,
Mm-hmm.
saying like, "Nah, I know that wasn't me."
Mm-hmm.
Well, talk about that whole prefrontal cortex.
Right. And so the only part of your brain that's actually fully developed when you're a child is your amygdala, which is your impulse center. So that
Hmm.
means I react based off of how I feel.
Okay.
Your prefrontal cortex is, like you said, we're reasoning and rationalizing that. So that's when you said, when you're trying to reason with a child, I'm like, that's your first mistake. You
Well,
can't
I don't do
reason.
that. That was in that foolish book.
Right.
That was,
Right. It's
talk
like,
the conscious
yeah, that
parent.
make
That don't
it
make no
doesn't
sense to
make
me.
sense because their reasoning center isn't even fully
Right.
developed, and it actually isn't fully developed till what age? Do you remember what age?
Um, I think it's like closer to 20,
26.
26.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's developing. It's not fully developed to 26. So it's still
Okay.
developing. There's more, reasoning ability, but it's not fully developed until 26. So
Oh,
certainly
mercy.
at
Well, we got a
5,
long way
6,
to go.
7, 8, 13. You know what I mean? I hear parents say, use your brain. Like, you didn't stop and think about that. And,
No.
and the child is like,
Stop and
no.
think about what? What is there to think about?
I didn't think that would ever happen.
Okay. All
And
right.
so, like I said, for me, one of the biggest issues with parents is that they don't treat their children like children. I've seen parents interact with a 5-year-old like she was a grown woman,
Yeah, yes.
and I'm just like, she's 5, right?
That's funny.
you know.
Yeah.
But there's these really high expectations that we have of children. And I think a part of that, like I said, most of the folks I work with of color, is we're trying to prepare them for the world as it is. And the world, when
Or
they
the
look
world
at,
and how we deal with it.
right, the world and how we, well, no, the world and how it is too, right? Because there are real life
True.
things that happen. Like I think about, because it was the one that most impacted me. I
Okay.
think about the Tamir Rice
Yes.
murder that happened. 12-year-old boy outside playing, in less than 3 seconds he was dead. And when the police officer phoned in, he said 18-year-old male. He saw this baby as an adult.
Wow.
That he saw
Wow.
this baby as an adult, and so we recognize somewhere inside of us that the world has not been kind to our folks. And so
Yeah.
I think that we're trying to drill into their head now, make better decisions, do this right, to try to prevent something really potentially fatal from happening. But we need to take a step back and recognize, listen, I've been at work all day dealing with adults. When I come home, these little people I'm dealing with, they're not adults. And it's my responsibility to recognize that. And so you have to speak to them from an emotional standpoint. So
Okay.
it's not, what did you think about that? It's, how did you feel? Right?
Okay.
Because sometimes the teacher didn't say anything wrong, but the way she said it is why the student flipped over the desk. I felt like she was calling me stupid.
I felt like she.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know
and
what I
those
mean?
words never came out of her. Okay.
Exactly.
I got you.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I didn't feel like children often don't feel heard. Like, I don't feel like I matter, or what I want to do matters in the household. And we're really quick to say it doesn't matter. I pay the bills, right? That's kind of damaging. Yeah, you write what you feel don't matter. I
Oh
pay the
my God!
bills,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And it seems funny. And, we watch Bernie Mac, and we watch all these things, and it sounds funny.
Yeah.
But when you try to when you put yourself in the child's shoes, you think like, that didn't feel good when I was a kid either. When I felt like I had
That's
to
true.
stay in a child's place where I couldn't have
Yeah.
input, or
Now, well, I think children today are a whole lot more vocal than we were able to be when we were children.
Thank God, especially
Yeah.
with things like molestation and all that
Yeah, that's true.
happening.
Yeah.
Secrets that people hold on to
Yes.
because out of fear, and rules that we kind of set that we may not have explicitly said to the child, but they learn from watching.
Yeah.
And so we need our children to be more vocal.
Yeah. Well, since we define mental health,
We actually, I was just thinking, I didn't give you a definition. So mental health is
Okay.
the evaluation or assessment of your cognitive, meaning thinking, emotional, spiritual, and behavioral well-being. So it's an assessment of how you're doing on those fronts.
okay. So the opposite of mental health, would you say?
So there is no opposite of mental health.
Okay. So, or it can just be the lack thereof, I guess.
No, so mental health is on a spectrum.
Okay, so well, the reason I'm asking is I'm trying to get a full understanding because we say mental health. It doesn't. go in the same classification as someone saying like their physical health, because there are limitations, or uh, there are spectrums to your physical health as
Right.
well.
Mhm.
But you can mental health can't be looked at and said, because you can look at a person in their physical
Mhm.
makeup and say, "Yeah, that person doesn't look too healthy."
Mhm.
Or if they look, if they're crippled, or they
Mhm.
display symptoms of being sick or something, like, you can pretty much judge,
Sometimes, yeah.
yeah, and say that person is not healthy,
Mhm.
or how can you say a person is not mentally healthy?
Mhm. So that's
That's what I'm trying to get an
right.
understanding about,
So there are, depending on where you are on the spectrum, some things will be more apparent than others, right?
like
And
behavior.
so, exactly, such as
Okay.
behavior, some things will be more apparent. You know, unfortunately, and I talk about this because of the work that counselors have done with veterans.
Hmm.
I am often sad for the veterans who come back with mental health ailments, not more than those with physical health ailments, but at least if, like, say, if your leg's been amputated,
Hmm.
people know that you had a disability.
Yes.
But if
Yes.
someone comes back and they have all of their body parts, but they have a mental health issue, you can't see that. You can't see something
No,
amputated on
you
the
can't.
inside,
Yeah.
right? And
Absolutely.
so,
That's good.
and so people aren't able to, always often tell, particularly because there are masks that we wear out of necessity,
Hmm.
right? I can't go to work all in my feelings. you know,
No, you
I
can't do
can't.
your
I
job.
have kids to take care of. I have to
Right.
stuff this down to be able to do it.
Of course.
So to some extent that is necessary, but there has to be an outlet.
Hmm.
But how can you tell? So if this is somebody who you know and love is in your life, and you know this person really well,
Hmm.
there's always going to be signs. I primarily work with adolescents, and so you think about what their norm was
Hmm.
and how have they deviated from that. So if this person used to be really social and now they're isolating,
Mm.
if this person used to spend time with the family and now they're up in their room all the time,
So there's a disconnect
right?
somewhere.
If this person used to have a lot of friends and they don't, they used to get good grades and they don't, right?
Hmm.
Or if this person really values, I don't know, their sneakers, or if they have things in their life, their video games,
Right.
and they start to give them away.
Hmm. Oh.
you
Okay.
know
Yeah. Then
when you
yes.
want to know, like, there are signs that knows, okay, when there's a change
Hmm.
in behavior, more drastic than not. If there's a change in hygiene, like, if you notice someone having an odor more often
Hmm.
than not, that is a big sign of a few things, namely trauma, sexual assault, or things like that.
Mm.
And so you really want to pay attention to changes in people's behavior. For us professionals, we know that only one area of functioning has to be disrupted
Hmm.
for it to be a diagnosis.
Okay.
Only one area of functioning, and so that's work/academic,
Hmm.
medical,
Okay.
legal, social/relationships,
Right.
and then something we call ADLs, which means activities of daily living. So sleeping, eating, hygiene.
Okay.
Only one of those areas have to be impacted for it to be a red flag for us. So things can be going well for you at work. They can be going well. You may not have any medical issues, no legal issues, right? You may be attended to your hygiene, but you realize that all your friends are distancing themselves from you,
Hmm.
right? That's a red flag. Or
Okay.
everything's going right except for you can't sleep at night. You have insomnia. You have hypersomnia or intermittent sleep, right?
Hmm.
That's a red flag that something's going on. That's probably the most common, where people say, I'm doing well, but I just can't sleep at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, uh, I guess that's what I was, and you've explained it, but
hmm
I was thinking in terms of opposite, being mental health versus like mental disease.
hmm
But I guess you
So
can't.
having a mental illness is a part of your mental health, because mental health is an assessment, right?
Okay.
So a mental illness will be a part of your mental health. How is your mental health,
Okay.
right?
Right. I
Exactly.
understand. I
Yeah.
get what you're saying now. Um. Wow.
So you have total, complete complete mental health,
Hmm.
and then you have psychosis.
Okay.
And most people don't fall on either end; they fall somewhere
Somewhere in the
in the
middle.
middle.
but it's still things that need to be addressed.
Right. Everything in middle school can be a diagnosis. That's why I said there's a diagnosis for that. Yeah. Because even for
Yeah.
adjustments, right? So adjustments means transitions, and that's more towards the complete mental health adjustments. We have adjustments and transitions our entire lives, right? From
Yes.
babies, I wasn't walking and now I'm walking, right? From first grade to second
True.
grade, from middle school to high school,
Yes.
from single to married, from, there's transitions. And
Transitions.
there are
Yes.
people who can adjust really well to those transitions. There are people that take longer
Okay.
and they need more support, right?
Understand.
There are people who have been
That's
working
good.
and they lose their jobs. And people don't realize, and I was saying this yesterday, there's a difference between resigning and being fired that is felt differently. And for the person, it's interpreted differently for them. One says, I left my own terms, I'm on to something better. The
Yeah.
other could mean to the person, I wasn't good enough, or I'm a failure, or I'm not even more,
Wow.
you know what I mean? And so that's an adjustment. And that's a diagnosis, right?
Wow.
Because now that person may be less likely to apply for a job because they've lost confidence,
Confidence. Yes.
right?
I get
And
it.
so now things start to fall apart around their relationships. I'm not going to be with nobody that's not working. All those things start to happen that further validate that message of lack of self worth for the person. And so
Right.
that's on this side of
Okay.
the
You
spectrum.
nowhere near
We're near
psychosis.
psychosis where you're hearing voices and seeing things that aren't there. That's
Yeah.
most people. First of all, probably I don't know. 1% of the population
Okay.
of mental health
Yeah.
are at that point. Most people are
Yeah.
in the middle.
Wow. Wow. That's really something. Now, would you tend to term something like when people have split personalities, is that at the level of psychosis, or is that somewhere in the middle?
So split personalities. We don't really. I know that movie came out and it was really good last
Yeah.
year.
Split. Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really good movie. I admit.
Yeah.
But we don't really. So there is something called multiple personality disorder. There's not a lot of evidence.
Okay. So was that movie far fetched, or is that
No,
something
the
that's
movie.
really?
I mean, the movie was about the birth of a villain. First of all, so
Yeah, of
I don't
course.
want to equate that to
No,
mental
I
illness.
understand.
But there are people who have been said to have multiple personalities, and they've been studied and things like that. Very, 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 very small percentage of the population, and it still isn't 100% founded. People don't
Okay.
really think it's a real disorder. But there is something called bipolar disorder, where people might say a person has different personalities, and that's when someone has really low lows and really high highs, and so it makes sense that their behavior will be completely different when they're depressed than when they're
I
not
get
depressed.
that, but let me ask you a question about that because uh, I've heard a theory that all of us are bipolar because we all have the ability to go positive, negative. You think about the elements of a magnet. A magnet is bipolar. It has north and south pole, which and has different frequencies that attract different things on both sides. All of us have that tendency or ability.
That's not accurate.
Okay,
So
explain that.
bipolar disorder means that you have two settings:
Okay, which is not normal.
major depression or mania.
Okay,
Right?
so you don't have a happy medium.
Exactly.
I got you.
So when you have that full, I'm having a brain fart right now, but basically you have a full array of emotions that you can express,
Yeah.
and that you have a medium, a middle, then you're not bipolar. It means that, so if these are the two polars, you're
Yeah.
in the middle. And bipolar doesn't just mean positive and negative.
No, I was just
And
giving
so,
an
oh yeah,
example
yeah,
of
yeah.
that.
I mean, are we all? One of the things I love to say, I remember saying this in the presentation. I like to say that any of us can become mentally ill given the right circumstances.
I totally agree with
I
that.
do believe that everyone has a breaking point.
I agree.
Everyone has a breaking
Yeah.
point. We just don't, fortunately, some of us never get to that point. But I do think that everybody has a breaking point given the right circumstances, right? I've
Right.
never been through a Hurricane Katrina, but I know that really impacted
Sure.
some people. I've never been through like the earthquake in Haiti, where whole generations of families were
That can
Like,
change who you are as a person.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so everybody has a breaking point. So, you know, as far as the mental illness, as people think about it when they say mental health, so the things about hearing voices, you know, you don't know what landed somebody homeless in the street talking to themselves,
True.
right? And if that same
Yeah.
situation wouldn't land you there, as as well. But most people, like I said, most people are in the middle, and no, everyone is not bipolar because you have more space in the
Right.
middle. People use it, and so I mean, but those are other things that we say haphazardly.
Yes.
We call people, oh, you know, you're bipolar because they may be in a good mood right now and they're not in a good mood, but that's not what bipolar is. Or we might call somebody. I heard someone call somebody schizo, right? That's nothing to play with. That's an actual
No,
real,
it's not.
you know,
Yeah.
real thing. But it's some of the, you know, that's it's damaging talk, and I get that we use humor a lot, particularly in our community,
Right.
to
Well,
deal
we
with
don't know the
pain.
meanings of
You know,
definitions a lot of times.
exactly,
We've just heard it somewhere and we
right,
apply it to behavior that we see,
exactly,
which,
exactly.
you know, it's not good to have those types of labels if you don't have a full understanding of what those things means.
Right. And I think it's not perfectly fine, but I think that if you're around adults who you all understand what you mean and you're joking and laughing, I'm not one
Yeah.
of those people that's like, you
Yeah,
gotta
right.
be
You
PC
you got
all
the
the
card.
time.
Wait a minute. This
Right.
is not right.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
we're in going down the road.
I
But
understand.
but because I work with teens and kids and they're listening, I
You're
say
more
just
careful.
be careful
Yes.
what you say around them.
Right. Right. Now,
We're winding down, huh?
we are. This is really good because uh, it's such an ignored topic, especially in our community. And sad to say, many people are suffering from getting certain symptoms dealt with in their spectrum of mental health. So much so that they have either closed themselves off from communicating or being a part of a community, or it's gotten to the point where they've lost trust. They you know they don't trust anyone to open up or talk to. How can we, if we see these types of problems, how can we as a community um, lend a helping hand, so to speak, help that get help for that person, or even put them in the direction of getting help without judgmental, you know, approaches, or without being accusatory, and without, you know, making the person feel isolated to the point where, you know, yeah, you need help because the rest of us over here is normal and you not. How can we approach that?
So we have to create spaces where we're having these conversations often, particularly for us. Like, I am super grateful. There have been many pastors that's reached out to me that had
That's
me
good.
talk on Sunday mornings
Wow.
about mental health from across the
You
pulpit.
mean they gave their sermon time?
Not their sermon time, but
Oh,
I mean,
okay. I
maybe
was
I
gonna
don't
say,
know.
wait a
They
minute.
gave up church time.
Okay, well,
At
that's
least,
a start.
right? And one of the first people to do that, I signed up. You know, I go to my parents' church, and I always talk about mental health. So they're
Sure.
always asking me to talk about mental health. One of the first people to do that was Bishop Wilcox.
That's a great platform.
He said, "I want you to come on Sunday morning.
Wow.
We're gonna, you know, during this time, we're gonna give you space, however much time you need to talk about this topic." I've been to several churches on Sunday mornings.
That's amazing.
Pastor Daniels had me talk at all three of his services. It's like, you need to
Wow.
come on
Okay.
in the pulpit, and so we have to, and not just do it once a year during mental health, during, you know, mental health awareness month. We have to campaign for it, have these conversations. I saw these commercials out about just having conversations about foster care. Did you know that, you know, because the more people talk about it, the more people be inclined to have it on their minds and actually
It
do
becomes
something
less
about
taboo.
it. It becomes less taboo.
Right.
And so I always tell people, you know, work it into a conversation.
Okay.
You know, it's one of the reasons I do these community mental health workshops,
Right.
to kind of tear down, like you said, break down the taboo that surrounds it, right? I get people to stop looking at outside of themselves and look within. Like, once I'm done my workshop, people say, I'm on that spectrum. And I'm like, I know.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
And
you
so
know, it's easy to
Right.
deny, you know, yourself.
Yeah.
You're so busy looking at everybody else.
Absolutely.
We have a tendency to do that. I mean, I do it. I think we all do it. And but this is good to
Yeah,
talk. So
absolutely.
this will not be the last time, and we'll make sure we do the show much earlier, so you don't have to travel so far.
Praise Jehovah. Won't he do it?
But I'm really excited and glad that you took the time to come out because I thought this was a much needed topic that we needed to address. And
I'll send you some resources as
please,
well in case people
because I'm going
inquire
to post
about
them up. I
Mm-hmm.
really am because I think it's an ignored subject, and I think it needs to be dealt with more in our communities to the point where it's not taboo, as well as getting people more comfortable to have this conversation and you know put down the stigmas. That it's not a bad thing to talk
Mm-hmm.
about mental health. Matter of fact,
Absolutely.
it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, if we address it more, we can deal with some of those hidden, swept under the rug problems. You know, especially with children that have gone through certain circumstances in a family and they've been told to keep it quiet, don't say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That turns them into a different person as an adult. You know, it leaves a scar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they could be in their 30s and not talk about something that happened 20, 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty sad
Mm-hmm.
to have to go through your daily routine
Mm-hmm.
and not ever deal with something that will affect your mental health.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
So I really thank you so much for sharing your profession and sharing your knowledge and expertise on this subject. And will not be the last time we have you on the show. Definitely. Because I would definitely like to even do a panel because I met a young lady a few weeks ago that is an advocate for domestic violence.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, she just became an advocate because she was a victim who has been 10 years out of a
Mm-hmm.
domestic violence relationship. And I'm actually going to have her on the show, but I think coupling mental health and subjects of domestic violence, or even I had a young lady on the show last year that talked about molestation
Mm-hmm.
and her own personal experience, and she's writing a book.
Yeah.
All those things need to be talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and you know we can bring those together on one platform. And I think that will begin to help some of the situations in our community. So, Dr. Ebony White, thank you again
Thank you for having me.
for coming on the Freedom Truth Radio Show, and this will not be the last time. So, just before we close out, tell the people how they can get a hold of you. Give a website, talk about your foundation briefly, and if you have contact info.
So you can go to my website, which is www.centerformarcus.org. I believe it's up on the screen if you want to
It is.
screenshot it. And my office is located at 802 East State Street. Again, we're doing free community mental health workshops, and the last one will be August 10th, which is not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday. So hopefully you come out. Please make sure you register for it so we have a seat for you. And if you want to find out information about me, feel free just to go on the website. I don't want to take up too much time. And that's it. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you. And again, thank you all for watching the Freedom Truth Radio Show. We'll be back on next Sunday talking with a guest over the phone. His name is Jack McKeag. He's going to talk about defeating the debt game and knowing how to get out of debt. And matter of fact, he talks about clearing up debt on your credit and how to get out of old debt that is still on your credit. So you don't want to miss that show. Next Sunday, 9 o'clock, 9:30. Right, Ruben? He said I was getting a new time slot, so stay tuned anyway. Thank you for all those who are watching Freedom Truth Radio Show, and that is it for us. We're off. Peace.